Hi, I'm Gang.
And hi, I'm Catherine. Welcome to Women Over 70 Aging Reimagined, our award-winning weekly podcast. Visit womenover70.com to learn how you may become involved. Join Aging Reimagined Circle and enjoy free participation in our online monthly programs.
Before we begin our interview, we'd like to share a new product with you from skintensive.com. Our skin gets more fragile and sensitive as we age. Mystery bruises on hands, arms, or legs start showing up out of nowhere. That's why I love Bruise Cream by Skintensive. Developed by two Harvard-trained dermatologists, Skintensive is made for mature skin and helps bruises fade faster while moisturizing. It's gentle, unscented, and truly effective. Find Bruise Cream and other great skincare for mature skin at skintensive.com. That's SKINTENSIVE.com. Your skin will thank you. And today's interview is unusual for us. When David Horton first approached us to do an interview, we were skeptical. After hearing his story, we knew it was one we wanted to share with you. David's wife, DeeDee Horton, died of brain cancer. An accomplished athlete and women's coach, her journey was complex. Had it not been for skilled mentors, she may never have had a story to tell. DeeDee's book, and you can see it behind David there, is Layer Upon Layer. It was lovingly published posthumously by her husband, David, last November. And David is with us today to share DeeDee's story of empowerment, courage, and contribution for women athletes. So, David, welcome to Women Over 70, Aging Reimagined. And let's get right into how, as a young girl, determined to play basketball, DeeDee felt invisible in her family and on the court.
Well, but before I answer your question, I just want to start off by thanking y'all for having me on today. I appreciate the time of your audience to listen, and I hope it's valuable to all of you. In regards to your question, you know, I think we would all agree that growing up is hard in general, but I think it makes it especially hard for children who grow up not being seen, heard, known. And I think that was kind of the story that both Sam in the book, as well as I think DeeDee experienced. In many ways, I think maybe the reason for choosing the term invisible, and I've thought real hard about that, is how frustrating and discouraging it must have been for both of them to have a goal that was so important to them, and they're committing themselves. They're working harder than everybody else. They're totally committed to it, and yet the more they do that, the less sense of belonging they get from the people around them, and especially important people like family and people that are friends. And I think that's certainly what some of the things that DeeDee experienced in her youth, where there was the confusion that went with going from being this female with incredible God-given talent for athletics. And she used to laugh and tell me, gosh, I was always the first picked, always on the recess grounds. The guys always wanted me first, and they loved playing with me, and it was great. We all had fun, that kind of thing. And all of a sudden, when middle school hit, it was like, no, nobody wants to even play with you anymore. And literally, I think part of that was because you could beat them at sports, which you start reaching an age where guys don't like that, and I think it gave DeeDee a sense of, is there something wrong with me? And at the same time, during that time period, I think she also experienced some of the stresses of being a good athlete and starting to play girls basketball. She was a lot better than most of the players that were out there. And so I remember her telling me that when she was in the 7th grade, the very first game, they scored 25 points and she scored 22 of them. And, the next day at homeroom, they announce it over the loudspeaker, and, DeeDee was not somebody who patted herself on the back and ran around, wanting attention. But some of the girls in her homeroom class started calling her a ball hog. And being a sensitive individual, DeeDee then proceeded to go through the rest of the season doing nothing but passing, no shooting. So it just kind of shows you how seemingly small things can cascade when maybe an adult doesn't kind of lead them through what's actually happening here, things like that. But the thing that I think is important here, not to take too much time on the issue of invisibility, is, I feel like the story that Sam went through is in some ways kind of a universal story for women who are ambitious and independent. And much of that, DeeDee felt that was related to boys being taught culturally to pay attention to aspirations. And she felt like the emphasis for girls was expectations. And a lot of those expectations were signals that are, things like go along, be nice, look pretty, and nurture other people. And in doing that, it sets up a deeper sense internally of you're there to nurture the other person and help them get what they want. And the things that are important to you should be secondary to others. And I know that serves a purpose in the mothering role, but that's very different for independent women who are interested in empowering themselves to be necessarily what they choose to be.
Mm-hmm. I know in the book, which I read and enjoyed very much, because she does open up all of what you're talking about, the invisibility factor for sure, and how she was treated by her own father, and consequently by a friend of his who was her coach at one time. And so how did you understand all of that?
Well, I would like to emphasize that there is certainly a large fictional component to the book in terms of trying to add more dramatic effect to it. Mm-hmm. But in many ways, I think that disconnection was occurred related to similar to the students that we talked about in terms of the change at middle school. I think DeeDee experienced the same thing at home related to her sports, and her father being very different in personality, less competitive, a much less serious individual in DeeDee. And, for him, although he was a good athlete, sports was about having fun. It wasn't as complex as DeeDee's. And so I think in many ways it was suddenly, again, around middle school saying it's time to put away all those trophies. And, why can't you be like some of these other girls now becoming young women and, dress up, do those things, not walk around in your gym shorts and things like that and sending signals like that. Mm-hmm. And then I think not really basically underestimating her emotional strength and her physical strength, and maybe not pushing and realizing that it should be her that gets to decide whether she wants to go to Division I, regardless of whether he thinks it's kind of like a meat market. And that is, they get a bunch of players. If you get injured, you're just kind of out, and they move on to the next person. And so some of his may have been driven by his own internal fears. But in my mind, that's the worst thing you can do, is you can take away somebody else's dream because of your own fears. That should be something they choose for themselves.
Yeah. I was really taken with the mentor. I think Ms. Collins, was that her name? And how she was so instrumental in Sam, DeeDee's accomplishments and motivation to keep going. And then DeeDee applied those same kind of values and principles in her own coaching. And so that was like the one role model she had, it seems like. Can you say a little bit more, say something about that?
Sure. Well, one, I would tell you that I think that Miss Collins was a bit of a amalgam of mentors, of course. but it certainly did center on two female coaches, which were the ones y'all noted in the dedication. She made it to two LCs. They both happened to have the same initials for their names. And they were the people that I think when, encouraged her and supported her when other people, well, maybe that she felt that her dream of playing at higher level of sports was in jeopardy. And the people that reminded her to believe in herself, they were the ones that reminded her that she's an adult, that she's becoming an adult, and that she is strong, she's smart, she's disciplined, she has all these characteristics that make her the perfect candidate to move on and do that. And she was fortunate. They did have one of them in particular was a lifetime friend, and in fact was someone who she and her husband, when DeeDee became ill, canceled winter vacations and stayed in our area and helped me take care of her. And so was really truly a lifetime mentor. And in many ways, DeeDee fused all that along with the fact that her strong efforts to be a mentor and trying to, incorporate things that she tried to teach through mentoring throughout the book. And I do think that was probably her biggest message. As you know, it was quite highlighted by segregating it out from the actual stories, alternating back and forth.
Right. Right. She really tells the story of mentorship and how important it is. And yeah, that was one of the things that I appreciated so much in the book. And go ahead.
Can I say one other thing about that too? I think one of the reasons DeeDee also felt so strongly about mentorship is, when she after her playing days were over and she finished her education and started teaching at middle school, she was seeing the same patterns of these aspirations versus expectations continuing for females, and basically watching young females experience the same kinds of messages that she was getting. And, I think that just pushed her that much more strongly to realize the importance of mentorship. And I think it was one of the reasons that she chose to leave teaching and go to coaching, where I think that she could be a little bit more almost direct about her mentorship, if you will. And I think you saw all those techniques that are described coaching. Those were things that DeeDee really did emphasize in all of her programs, was the, reading books and emphasizing, the growth as a person, not just on the court. And so, yes, it was always, I think, a big lifetime goal of hers, and much of that being wanting to pass the gift that she had been given on to others, and hope that would continue, of course.
It was a real story of leadership, for sure. She was, but one question that I have is, so it seemed within her there was this competition between basketball and volleyball. And how did that happen?
Well, I really don't think there was a lot of competition in her mind. Her love was always basketball. It probably, in some ways, ironically, may not have been her best sport. She was great at everything, but she was incredible as a soccer player in her youth. And volleyball, she actually didn't even start playing volleyball until she was a sophomore in high school. And I think that speaks pretty highly for her athletic ability, considering she received a D1 scholarship playing volleyball. In terms of why she ended up actually initially playing volleyball first, I think that more goes back to the strong need, just like Sam felt in the book, that DeeDee was ready to leave home, start anew, kind of move out of to some degree out of a community where she didn't feel understood, if you will. And the timing that was described in the book is exactly as it occurred for DeeDee. And she just wasn't, if she would have waited, I feel 100% certain that she would have ended up getting a scholarship in basketball. But she was not willing to take the chance, because she didn't come from a family that was going to pay for her education, et cetera. She knew she had to do it on her own, and she was not going to take the chance of losing that opportunity.
kid are we talking about here? When is this happening?
This would be happening as she is a sophomore in high school through her senior year in high school, where as she started playing volleyball, and obviously her skills just grew hugely. That was one of her great mentors, her volleyball coach, the one I was describing. And that's where, when she was a senior, she ended up having to decide, gosh, I'll probably get offers at both. And she was going to, but the deadline for having to commit to a scholarship for volleyball falls much earlier in the year. And if you don't commit, they move on to the next person down the list because they need to make sure their team's in place. So that's kind of what forced her into starting with volleyball, if you will.
What year are we talking about here?
She would now be a senior in high school.
No, but what year was it? 1960 something?
Oh no. This happened in the 1980s.
1980s. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
David, when did you come into DeeDee's life?
Actually, that was an unexpected thing for both of us. It was when she was home from school just before her sophomore year in college, and I met her at a place where I was working, and I didn't even actually meet her. She was working off site, but it was one of those situations where I turned a corner, and I don't know how to explain it except I saw this person who was so outer focused on the other person. I sensed no ego on her part and just total attention to the other person. And I said, wow, that's a special person. And, it ended up that she actually ended up getting assigned to work over where I was for a while before she went back to school. And we ended up, talking, and slowly, next thing you know, she came back after a little brief summer vacation with her family. And when she dropped by, we were having an office party, and I said, hey, we're having an office party. You should come and such things. And so she did, and we ended up, meeting each other and stayed in touch. And I was the reason actually that she ended up changing from volleyball and moving to basketball, because she actually, amazing to me now that I truly know the depth of her story, she, wanting to leave her community so badly, she obviously immediately had a similar sense about me, that I was someone that she felt would respect and honor her, and I felt the same from her, and we were just immediately, tuned into each other. And she chose to give up a D1 scholarship and came back to Olympia, and that was 35 years ago, and so we were together 32 years, and she ended up returning to basketball by actually played at a local college here, where she actually was very successful. It was at a Division II level, but she was an All-American her senior year in college, and so it was a success at a local level. But she was always disappointed to some degree, because she felt that she could have excelled at higher levels. But I'm thankful for it, because it gave me the greatest gift of my life. And I think had that played out that way, we would have never happened, which would have been a great loss, specifically for me.
When we talked, you spoke a little bit about Title IX. Do you want to tell our listeners a little bit more about that?
Sure. Title IX, of course, most people tend to want to think that was legislation that was directed specifically towards sports. In reality, in brief, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that first started the strong conversation about discrimination, including discrimination based on sex, was more oriented toward employment and public accommodations. And that was in 1964. As the years went on, more and more attention was to areas that weren't covered by that, and that's where they would do patchwork legislation. And thanks to basically the voices of feminists in the late 1960s, it started the push toward fighting sex discrimination in areas of education in particular, and especially that led to Title IX, which basically prohibited discrimination in all federally funded education programs. So, ironically, although it was for all areas of education, it was the requirement now that schools had to include attention to girls and boys both in sports. That led to huge opportunity for females they didn't have before, because now they had more teams and coaches, they had better funding and fairer treatment. And what a great success, because if you go back to 1972 when it was passed, there were about less than 300,000 girls playing basketball at that time in high school. Today, it would be greater than 3 million per year playing high school sports, and that's why it's perceived that Title IX was directly towards sports.
Mm.
Yes.
Great success.
Did DeeDee identify as a feminist? Did she consider herself a feminist?
I think so. Yes, I think so. It's to me that's a loaded word, because everybody interprets that through their own lens. But I would say absolutely she was, and much of that, of course, centering from her own experience and wanting that not to be perpetuated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, certainly in her deeds and her acts, she was a very ardent feminist. Yeah,
Agree.
So when did she start writing this book? And tell us about that evolution.
Well, DeeDee's coaching jobs were a little bit limited because she was married to me. And so when she started coaching, she needed to stay in the area, or wanted to stay in the area, so that we didn't have to have some type of long distance marriage. And, unfortunately, the various 4-year school jobs were all filled, and these are coveted jobs that don't open up easily. So she had to focus in on a little bit of a lower level college, where she coached at a community college here in Olympia for a decade, which she loved. It was a great experience, but she always really wanted a 4-year school experience, because what she would find is in the 2 years that she had her players at a junior college, just about the time the players really get it and understand it, they're moving on and they're going to programs where other people inherit her players. And, that's what really brings the sauce, if you will, to a team. It's when all of a sudden the juniors and seniors almost become like assistant coaches to really push the early players. And boy, you really see the benefits of that team magic and all of that kind of thing. So she really wanted to do that. And that's something that I ended up deciding, for my own personal reasons, that it was time for me to cut back in my work. And it did afford her the opportunity to start looking for 4-year jobs. And she found a job in New Mexico, and she went down and coached. And irony of irony, the job I think fit her well. Where it didn't fit well was she ran into, again, cultural misogyny. And I'm not here to talk negative about anyone, but let's just say it was a situation where an athletic director felt like the women's team was there more to entertain the men's teams and things like that DeeDee definitely was not going to have any part of. And she just didn't, in his mind, and he's the one that was her boss, if you will, didn't feel like she was going to be a fit for them. And so that did not work out long term. And so, long and the short of it is, I said, hey, we can always move and find a different spot. That'd be great. And I think we had a bit of an age difference, and she said, let's give us both some time to travel together and do some other things, and in a sense, start my retirement, if you will. And I'll expecting she had longevity in her family, thinking she might have a later chapter. We did that. And ironically, about 5 years into that, all of a sudden, when she wasn't taking care of her family, which she would do when we were here in Olympia, and I was involved in that as well. But when we were gone, she was always writing every day. We'd start the morning with our morning mocha and our ritual to each other that I described in the book. We'd read together, and then I'd be off and doing various things, and she'd be in there just working. And about a year into that, I said, "Man, you're really getting serious about your writing." And sure enough, she said, "Yeah, I'm going to write a book." So she did that off and on, and it took a period of about 6 years before she got to the completion of what started as 2 stories, then said, "How am I going to blend these into one?" And then the hugest challenge is editing it down to a publishable length. And that's where she was when we actually went down to Santa Fe, New Mexico, where we had a small second home there. And that was her intent, where she was going to do the 5th edit to get it down to the right length. And that's when she had her seizure, and turned out that she had an aggressive brain tumor. So,
Very rough.
yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Man plans and God laughs or something like that.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. Yes.
So were you the main editor then in finishing the book, completing the book, and blending the stories together?
Yes, I was kind of the central editor, if you will. I did not do that without advice. The biggest challenge, DeeDee had cut the book down to about 135,000 words, and we wanted it less than 120. And where I had the most help was ideas for restructuring and cutting some characters and things like that. The writing is all hers. It was really shifting things around in order to make it all fit together after cutting out certain things, if you will. These are things that I think DeeDee, of course, intended to do herself, but for obvious reasons that wasn't possible. And she granted me the right to do that because she knew that I had read the book in all of its different forms, and I knew her so well. And she just said, "Hey, as long as you protect the heart and the soul, I trust you completely," and gave me that permission to do that. And a great honor for me, of course.
Oh, David, what was it like for you then, actually finishing that book after DeeDee had passed? Was it healing? Was it difficult?
It was both. It was healing from the standpoint of it certainly maintained my strong connection, which I'll always have with her. But it gave me when I was ever struggling with where am I going with this, and am I doing the right thing, that's what I would do. I would talk to her, and I would write notes to her, and I'd say, "Gosh, I need your help here. You gotta send me some kind of signal that I'm doing the right thing." And I guess to me that signal was I would wake up in the morning or something that would happen that I'd immediately go, "Hey, okay, that's her way of telling me, yes, you're on the right track," or "Wait a minute, that doesn't feel quite right." And so I think she was still leading the way that way. In terms of whether it was hard, I think the hardest part was, you know, we were very bonded, 32 years. And it's hard. The brain fog that I went through, and part just from grieving and part just the physical, toll of care for being hyper vigilant for so many months, taking care of her. I had a lot of brain fog, so it took what energy I had, but it's been a joy. I've learned so much about myself. I've met so many people just having that. I've had friends that agreed to be test readers, things like that. And it's really brought nothing but joy to my life, and connected me with people that I probably wouldn't have connected with without that gift.
It's a gift. I mean, Gail and I both have read the book, every word to the last word. It just, it's so beautiful. The title is perfect. It is layer upon layer of life's complexities. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and thank you for bringing up layer upon layer again. If people frequently ask me, what does that mean? And what I tell everyone is the layers I think DeeDee was talking about throughout her book was the cultural programming that we all absorb and the beliefs that we pass on. And I think she felt, especially because they are so different related to males and females, that it creates roadblocks. It keeps us from seeing each other, hearing each other, and knowing each other. And I think, in a sense, we get a microcosm of the way she felt as a kid in marriages. And I think that was really a lot of the layers she was talking about too. That don't we all need to question the program we're getting and ask, are those really the messages we want to absorb, and are they really the messages that we want to pass on? And we have a choice, because we can choose layers and to help build layers that bring connection, or ones that tend to encourage disconnection. And I think at the end of the day, my feeling, what she educated me on was, I grew up in a man's world. My parents, my dad was all brothers. My mom had nothing but brothers. And that was the only world I knew. And I made all sorts of assumptions about women they're like me. They're setting their sight on a goal, and they're saying, I'll work hard and therefore I'll get there. And of course, I learned through patience to say, hey, wait a minute, it's a little different from this side. And the biggest gift that she gave me was, I'm like so many males. I'm a fixer. I tend to want to overfunction. I don't want to see pain from the people I love. And sometimes what was it doing? It was unplugging my ears and my heart. Because sometimes people just want to express things and figure it out themselves. They don't want you to jump in and start fixing, because you're just disconnecting and the screen goes blank. And she taught me that gift in the middle of our marriage, if you will. And it was the greatest gift I've ever been given, because we had a great marriage before that, and we moved into a zone that I frankly always dreamed about, and I think she did too. And so that's why I'm also a believer that this is not just a book for women to read. I encourage men to read it, because it's a different story for men, but we're programmed as well. And if we look at that, we may find the greatest gift that we'll ever want.
There's a paragraph here that I would like to read to close. It's on page 275 in chapter 25. And it really struck me. And she was talking with a friend, and it starts, her head slumped forward, her chin on her chest, and I could see the outline of her shoulders shuddering with each sob. Tears began pouring down my cheeks. This is Sam speaking. We had always managed to skate around the edges, keeping a safe distance from the thin ice. Now we were standing right on top of it, hearing the cracks forming under our skates, watching them branch out like an expanding spider web, and knowing they could engulf us. Our crying was the only sound in the car, the sound of shared pain neither of us knew how to handle. Layer upon layer of this injustice had built up over our high school years. We had both seen it and felt it, but had never put it into words before. Just an example of her beautiful writing. So, layer upon layer. David Horton, thank you so much for sharing DeeDee with us. We really appreciate your doing that. And where can we buy her book?
Well, I appreciate you asking. I would like to say a couple things, if I could, in terms of me closing. Is first, again, I want to thank y'all for having me. I want to thank y'all for clearly being great mentors yourselves. I have a feeling that the people that listen to your podcast are mentors as well. because I listen to your shows and the guests and what they talk about, and I really loved it because I think it goes back to the core of DeeDee's book, where it's reminding females, and really should be all of us, but females in particular, because of the challenges that our culture brings. It reminds us that that it's never too late to become the best version of yourself, and it's your painting. So paint with bold brushstrokes and vibrant colors. And so I, as y'all being mentors, I'm hoping that you think about people, you girls interested in athletics, males who you think can learn from looking at their programming, maybe girl dads especially, to understand where small actions and words can cause devastation to girls. And last but not least, just women in general, us reminding the importance of supporting each other as a community and trying to mentor each other through the challenges. So this book, you can find it on Amazon, Layer Upon Layer by DeeDee Horton. And if you want just a little background about our story, you can also look on the web at Layer Upon Layer book on either Facebook or on Instagram. That'll just give you some background on that. And I do appreciate y'all having me again today. And I hope y'all have benefited in some way in hearing me pass on some of DeeDee's words. I appreciate your time and your energy.
Thank you, David. Thank you so much. And listeners, we'd like to see more of you at our monthly online programs. Make your voice heard as together we change the conversation about women aging. Visit Aging Reimagined Circle at womenover70.com. And there's another podcast we'd like to suggest to you, which is Jennifer Fink's Fading Memories. It's a podcast for caregivers of loved ones with dementia. It provides insights and guidance on communicating effectively, managing